Do you ever feel like you just don't have the time to sit down and read the news every morning? Sometimes things get so hectic you can't even scroll through your feeds while you're trying to get ready. A new podcast from Boise State Public Radio has you covered. I'm George Prentice, and I want to invite you to check out The Connector every weekday morning. You can get up to speed on all of the Idaho news you need to start your day without ever interrupting your morning routine. All you have to do is hit play. That's The Connector from Boise State Public Radio. Find it wherever you get your podcasts.
More Idaho Matters now from the studios of Boise State Public Radio News. I'm Gemma Gaudette. The recent fires in LA put a spotlight on how nonprofits jump in and help during disasters. But many don't know that nonprofits also help with long-term recovery efforts after a disaster happens, including helping communities rebuild. And many nonprofits try to prevent or at least anticipate future disasters. Vanessa Fry is an associate research professor and director of the Idaho Policy Institute at Boise State University, and she wrote about how nonprofits pitch in before, during, and after disasters strike for the nonprofit news organization, The Conversation, and we asked her to join us today to talk more. Hi, Vanessa.
Hi, Gemma. Great to be back.
So good to have you back. So when we're talking about nonprofits, who are we talking about? I mean, are these larger groups like the Red Cross?
That's a really good question. I think sometimes people think right away when a disaster strikes, the Red Cross, they're out there, they have their brand really easy to identify, but there's also the small nonprofits that are on the ground in the communities that are just as important as those large scale nonprofits in responding to disasters.
So can we start with the LA fires? How did nonprofits jump in to help out during that time?
Right. I mean, what a tragedy. And people there are still dealing with the aftermath and just getting back into their homes. And so on the kind of spectrum of nonprofits, you had nonprofits on the ground that were immediately helping shelter individuals and families. And the Red Cross and other large scale organizations were there too to supply items such as clothing, food vouchers, support relocation efforts. And so what we see in really large scale disasters like the ones in LA, like the one we saw in Hawaii last year, are nonprofits of all sizes coming together to really support the response.
You also wrote about how these groups work long term to help with recovery efforts after the disasters. And can you talk a little bit more about this part of it? Because this is the part that I think so many of us never hear about, right? Because it stops being in the news once the disaster has stopped. And what I mean with the LA fires in particular is like once those fires ended, we kind of stopped hearing about it in mainstream media.
Right. Yeah. So imagine, Gemma, in Idaho, we have the foothills here too. Imagine that someone in the foothills loses their home. They don't realize that the fire is coming. They're unable to get everything out of it, including all their important documents like their driver's license, their passport, birth certificate. So just from the very simple ability to kind of go on with your life, to access your bank accounts, nonprofits can help people recover those types of documents in order for them to kind of continue on with their recovery. But that's going to happen not immediately after the fire, right? These are the kind of long-term rebuilding efforts that nonprofits, large and small, help families and individuals with.
So can you talk a little bit more about that rebuilding part with communities and how nonprofits pitch in? Because I have to say, I was actually in Maui over Christmas, and what shocked me was the scope of how large this fire was. Like, I knew where it was located, but I was stunned by the actual devastation and the neighborhoods that were leveled. So nonprofits come in, and what do they do when it comes to this rebuilding part for these communities that have been leveled?
Mm-hmm. And really, you can think from the very first piece of making sure that the people themselves are safe and secure. And so I believe some of the families from Maui are still in long-term but non-permanent housing situations. And so nonprofits are going to continue to provide some financial support for those households to be able to do that. On the rebuilding side, we have nonprofits like Habitat for Humanity who are pretty well known for going into communities and helping on the kind of the physical rebuilding effort, trying to bring down that cost of capital so it's not so expensive for communities, and helping coordinate efforts for from cleanup and then to rehousing families and individuals. And again, not just rebuilding the homes themselves, but essentially rebuilding people's lives as well.
And there are other nonprofits that actually help communities prepare for disasters with things like training programs, but a lot of folks don't know about these nonprofits. So Vanessa, what kind of training are we talking about?
Well, so there are all types of training, from something as maybe simple and straightforward as CPR training that people get. So, what do you do when you're on, in a place and people need your direct help? But also emergency response training. There are trainings that are set up, and sometimes they're done by volunteer firefighters or other nonprofits that can help a community develop a disaster plan before the disaster happens. And so they're usually free trainings. Community members can go. They can create an evacuation plan for their families. They can make sure they have a kit available so they can grab and go in a time of a disaster. Nonprofits like the Red Cross offer programs like Sound the Alarm, and that's when they go into homes and make sure that the alarms are working in the homes. This often happens in manufactured housing, older housing, targeting households on fixed incomes that, maybe they haven't been able to update those smoke and fire detectors yet. And so nonprofits help on the prevention side of things too.
In your writing, you also mentioned a bill in the Idaho legislature that would give cash to homeowners so they can make their properties more fire resistant. Can you talk a little bit more about that, and also the parallel that you made between LA's wildland urban interface and Idaho's?
Right. I don't think a lot of people think that physically LA and Boise in particular have a lot in common, but we all, both the communities, are really close to the natural environment, that wildland urban interface. And that's really the space between where people live and where nature is, where a lot of fire resistance and prevention efforts can really take place. Like, how do we prepare a home that's up in the foothills to make sure that not only is it constructed with fire-wise materials, but the landscape itself is fire-wise? And so the bill would help with efforts like that, from, I think, changing cedar shake shingles into roofing that is fire resistant, and also clearing debris around a home to make sure that if a fire does occur, that the home is safe and is less likely to catch fire because that debris is not right adjacent to the home.
Before I let you go, how important is it for folks to do research before they donate to a nonprofit?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's always good to know where we're investing our money, whether it's in the stock market or with nonprofits. I think that right now there's so much out there from GoFundMe campaigns and whatnot to know where to give your resources. So going to a nonprofit's website, looking up their tax information, their 990s, people may have heard about that, to make sure that they're a sound and secure nonprofit is incredibly important. There are nonprofit associations in most states where you can get in touch with them and have a sense of, I'm really interested in this cause. Can you help me find a nonprofit that would make sense for me to support? And I think lastly, for people to consider supporting both small and large nonprofits if one has the means, because they're both equally important in a time of disaster prevention and response.
I want to thank you so much for taking time to talk with us once again. We've been speaking with Vanessa Fry. She is the director of the Idaho Policy Institute at Boise State University. She wrote about how nonprofits pitch in before, during, and after disaster strike. She wrote this for the nonprofit news organization, The Conversation. We will put a link to her article on our website, boisestatepublicradio.org. This is the Idaho Matters podcast. I'm Gemma Gaudette.
Each morning, it's a new opportunity, a chance to start fresh. Up First from NPR makes each morning an opportunity to learn and to understand. Choose to join the world every morning with Up First, a podcast that hands you everything going on across the globe and down the street, all in 15 minutes or less. Start your day informed and anew with Up First by subscribing wherever you get your podcasts.